Okay, let's get started. Thank you again so much for coming and joining us today for our discussion on increasing immigrant integration and inclusion through community partnerships. My name is Leah Spiesmaker, and I'm the Immigrant Integration Program Manager at Clinic. I am talking to you all from Austin, Texas, where I work. But as most of you know, Clinic is based in Silver Spring, Maryland. For those of you on the line who are unfamiliar with Clinic, just a little bit of background information here. Clinic stands for the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, Inc. And we are a membership organization with over 420 nonprofit organizations in 48 states. Our members are immigration legal service programs, charitable immigration legal service programs across the nation. We train over 10,000 people each year on immigration-related topics. And we've got several different sections of Clinic as an organization, but three of the main ones that would interact with the public would be training and legal support. They're the folks who do immigration law training, capacity building, which is the section I work in, and we work on growing and expanding the capacity of the network. And then we also have an advocacy section. If you're interested in membership, you can find the application at that link below. Housekeeping per usual. Happy to hear your comments in the chat. I know several of you are introducing yourselves there. Thanks so much for doing that. If you do have a question during the presentation, I'd love it if you could put it in the Q&A icon in that section, because there's enough of you on the line that I fear I may miss the question if you put it into the chat. If you can put that in the Q&A section, your questions, that will help me see it later on. Before we get started on the content, I would love to ask you to complete a quick poll, just so I know where we're coming from. I'm going to launch it here and just choose one of these answers. Which best describes your current integration work? First choice would be, I'm here for the basics about integration, the terminology, what it looks like. The second choice would be, we've begun to offer integration-related programming at our location. And then the last one would be, I seek new ideas and inspiration to enhance current extensive integration programming. I don't see anyone answering it, so perhaps something went awry. Let me see here. Let me relaunch it and see if that happens. All right, how about that? If you see it now, I would love to get your answers. There you go. Okay, sorry about that. Just wait a couple seconds to see if give everyone a chance to read all the options and choose the one that's most fitting for your situation. Okay, about 5 more seconds. Okay, great. Here are the results. So about 60% of you are here for the basics. Terminology, what it looks like, how to get started. 16% are here to get ideas for expansion. And then about 20% of you already offer extensive programming and are looking for new ideas. Great, thanks for letting me know that. Let me continue then, okay? Okay, so here's our agenda for the day, or the hour. We're going to do those immigrant integration basics, terminology, what it looks like, Clinic's philosophy about integration, and then we're going to move into talking about integration data, what kinds of data to collect, how to use it, where to get it, and then we'll move into community partnerships, discuss its nexus with the data, identify some strong examples of partnership that has promoted integration, and then talk about how to manage those partnerships, and then we'll take your questions. So again, if you do have questions throughout, put them in the Q&A box, and I will see them as we go along. Okay, so to begin with, we've got these 5 statements here, and I'm going to read them, and as I read them, I just want you to think in your head, true or false. And then we will go through a couple more slides, and then I'll give you the answers. And you can revise your mental answer sheet if you need to. So first, true or false, immigrant integration and assimilation are synonyms. So integration and assimilation are synonyms. True or false? Second statement, newcomers are those arriving from countries outside the United States. True or false? 3, the receiving community is the group of people welcoming the newcomers. Often they were born in the US. 4, immigrant integration is solely the responsibility of the newcomers. And 5, immigrant integration is solely the responsibility of the receiving community. Okay, hold tight to those mental answers. Here is Clinic's definition for immigrant integration. This is how we view it and think about it, and this guides our work. To us, immigrant integration results from an equal partnership between newcomers and the receiving community who work together to make their community more inclusive. Promoting and pursuing immigrant integration is the responsibility of both newcomers and longstanding residents, and it is a dynamic process that is most successful at the local level. So of course, I've bolded the words that I think are most important in our definition, that equal partnership idea between the newcomers and the receiving community, working together, working to make the community more inclusive, and also the responsibility of both the newcomers and the longstanding residents. And it's a dynamic process, messy, sometimes uncomfortable, inconvenient, and also has wonderful results and can be, really beautiful and inspiring. And it's most successful at the local level. What does it look like? These are just some examples that we've seen within our network of examples of integration and inclusion. I'm certain have your own examples of in your own local area of what it has looked like for you. But I thought I'd give you some examples here so that you can have some concrete ideas of what we think it looks like. In Silver Spring, I used to live in Silver Spring, Maryland, and at one of the local parks, the city government put up a piñata pole installed in the public park for everyone to use. Another example would be local libraries having books and other resources, signage, things like that, available in the languages used by the residents of the community. Parishes or community organizations decorated with items from the countries represented in their congregations or their offices. A demographically changing community sees its first foreign-born person elect to office, such as Parent Teachers Association or City Council or any sort of local governing entity. Leadership positions or advisory positions within a parish or an organization are held by members of the communities represented. And organizations offer town halls or distribute surveys in order to learn what community members want and need. Interpreters or translated materials are available. So again, those are some examples of what integration can look like. So if you want to go back and revisit your ideas about the statements that we mentioned earlier, immigrant integration and assimilation are synonyms. That is not true. We discussed the definition for integration, and assimilation really to us means the responsibility is only on the newcomer. That newcomer needs to abandon his or her language, cultural practices, belief systems in order to become like those that are living in the receiving community. And again, the receiving community really bears no responsibility for including the newcomer. So to us, those words are different. Newcomers are those arriving from countries outside the United States. True. Receiving community is the group of people welcoming the newcomers. True. Immigrant integration is solely the responsibility of the newcomers. To us, that is false. And immigrant integration is solely the responsibility of the receiving community. To us, that is also false. As I mentioned before, we believe it's a joint responsibility. I want to pause here and ask some big picture questions without answers. Simply to frame this discussion in our sort of in the context of our daily work. I know that for many of you on the line, you are possibly direct service providers and therefore very busy, seeing clients every day, either offering ESL classes or doing immigration legal service paperwork, tax prep, whatever it is that you're doing. And if it's direct service, it's often difficult to step back from that day-to-day direct service application services to look at the big picture. And I just ask that we try and do that during this hour. And hopefully, this hour is a space for you to be able to do that, to take the time to think about the big picture. And the big picture to us is, what is the long-term goal for the communities we serve? Of course, short-term goals is to serve as many people as we can in those classes or with those immigration legal service application assistance. But the big picture to me is integration, is creating a community where everyone can access services and can contribute, can volunteer, feel safe calling the police, is safe and able to go about their daily lives, feeling secure in their community, and that they belong. And so to us, that's the long-term goal. And I think another question to stop and think about is, how are clients impacted if our programs concentrate solely on service delivery instead of remembering to think about this big picture, this long-term goal of integration and inclusion. So if we only focus on the service delivery aspect, I think we miss a big part of the power of our positions, which is big, large-scale community change and reshaping that community so that everyone can participate. So how can we collectively work to improve integration and inclusion? I think our conversation today about the data we can collect and the partnerships that we can form might give us some answers in how we can collectively get this work done. I just want to make two declarative statements that the clinic believes strongly. One, integration efforts are most effective at the local level. So you all are the perfect people to be doing the integration work in your communities. It is, of course, very important to have federal and state guidance for integration, federal and state expectations for integration, proclamations, task forces, offices, at those levels of government. Those go a long way in setting the stage, setting the expectations, setting the tone of an administration, setting some large-scale examples and things like that. But while those things are necessary, the actual work gets done on the ground, at your office, at the church, at the Boy Scout meeting, at the grocery store, at the religious event, the community event. That's where people are interacting with each other. That's where the services are being rendered. And so you all have the most power and the most ability to make big change in your communities. We also believe that two keys to successful integration programming at that local level are data and effective partnerships. These two things, the information and the partnerships that you form and therefore use this information that you collect, are really key ways that you can move the needle on integration at the local level. So let's talk about the data first. So before you start with the fun brainstorming process of thinking about what types of programming can you offer and what types of change do you want to see in your community and what is possible, in my opinion, you first need data. So what types of data can you get? Here's some ideas, certainly not an exhaustive list. So some data that shows how people are using community services might be interesting. Maybe there's a certain population of newcomers who aren't using the library for some reason, or who aren't comfortable calling the police, or who are eligible to vote and aren't voting. So that information about how people are able to use the community services could be very helpful to you. Data that shows how clients feel in their community might be helpful. Do people feel safe? Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel sort of hidden or unable to participate for some reason? The feelings aspect is also really important. Data that shows a sense of responsibility that community members feel, I think, is also really relevant. Do community members feel responsible, called to, obligated to welcome, to ensure access, to make sure folks are represented in leadership positions or advisory councils or things like that? Or do they not? And I think that sort of sense of responsibility is a place where you can move the needle as well. You just have to know first, what is the sense of responsibility people are feeling? Data that shows a level of understanding about integration by community members and agency staff, I think, is really key. What do community members and agency staff understand about integration and the process? Do they equate it more with the word assimilation, like we talked about earlier? Is there a need for community or agency-wide education before you even get to the programming aspect of your strategic plan around integration? Is there education that needs to be made and done at the receiving community level before you start to roll out new programs for newcomers? Data that shows level of awareness about agency activities regarding integration might also be helpful. If agency staff, if you work at a big agency and you're offering ESL classes or immigration legal services or something else to newcomers, but other staff outside of that program don't even know about it, there probably is a need for some education there, both about why, what services are being rendered, but also why. What's the impact? Why are they necessary? How do those services impact people's lives? So Clinic does have 3 surveys that help you get at this information. Agency staff survey, client survey, community member survey. They're in English and Spanish, they're online in a hard copy, and they're each about 10 questions or so. So I want to share with you a little bit about some of the data that we've seen come from these surveys. We've had several agencies that are members of Clinic offer these surveys to their community. So we have the aggregate data from all of those agencies doing the survey data collection. So at this point, we've seen several hundred agency survey results. So from that aggregate data, we've seen, for example, that about 36% of agency staff believe that the agency asks the immigrant community about their needs before planning and implementing a program. This is not to say that it's a yes or no that the agency actually does this. The survey is actually asking about agency staff understanding and awareness of the agency's activities, which to me is really important, because you're trying to measure agency staff understanding and awareness of the agency's involvement in integration. And if you're doing all these things and the agency staff actually don't know about it, they can't promote it and support it. 33% of agency staff report that there is immigrant representation on boards and committees within the agency. And then 33% of agency staff report that immigrant integration is included in a strategic plan, mission statement, or measurable goals. So again, this is really just measuring agency awareness that certain things are in place. So one could take this data, for example, and say, well, gosh, we are actually asking the immigrant community about their needs. We do actually have newcomer representation on different boards. And we also include immigrant integration in our strategic plan, but yet only 1/3 of our staff are reporting that they know about it. So we really need to go back and educate and speak with the staff first before we amp up our integration related work. We also have the client survey. I think at this point we have about 2,700, 3,000 maybe client survey results collected from across the nation. And again, this has about 10 questions in English and Spanish. So with these results, we've seen 82%, 83% of the respondents report knowing where to go for healthcare. We've seen 64% report feeling comfortable calling the police, and 94% reporting that they feel like they can improve their lives if they want. So again, this data is really measuring how a client feels and is moving within their community, and it could help with narrowing down programmatic choices. In this case, for example, we might say, okay, well, it seems like more folks, we need more help. We need to provide more assistance for newcomers to feel comfortable calling the police. So at this point, we'll sort of tackle that area of service provision and leave the healthcare for later. Lastly, the community member survey. Of course, this might include newcomers. You can't really isolate the groups because because everyone is, of course, a community member. But you are trying in this case to get those receiving community members who have been longtime residents of the community. But for example, with these, I think we've collected around 800 or 1,000 of these. 39% report believing that the city government promotes immigrant integration as a benefit for their community. 47% report believing that immigrants, regardless of legal status, have the same basic rights that they do. And 65% notice culturally and or linguistically appropriate services at public spaces, such as libraries and public parks. Again, some of these questions hint at awareness instead of actual service offering, right? It could be true that the libraries do have linguistically appropriate services at their locations, but we're really talking about awareness here, and community members might not be aware of that, so they can't promote it or support it. Or you could use this data as very informative about what public education efforts might be needed. In this case, if 47% believe that immigrants do not have the same basic rights that they do, then that might be an area of public education that is needed. And you can support that with your data. So how and why, or how and where can you use the data that you collect? I think there's many uses. I'm sure you all can think of many more than on this list, but of course, to me, it's very helpful in forming partnerships, which we'll talk about in a second. I think you can use this data in funding applications as justification for expansion or new types of programming for which you need funding. I think you can use the data on social media to drum up support for a certain effort, to market success, to really state how proud you are of the community. If there's been some changes in the data or a really nice data point that comes out of the surveys, like 94% of newcomers feel welcome in our community. I think you can use it in public statements and in media, especially when you're making an appeal to the local community for support or engagement in a certain initiative. And I think you can use the data in project proposals to help you defend your decisions on certain programming efforts and to back it up with data. So to me, there is, of course, a direct nexus between data and partnerships, and which partnerships you would choose to pursue. Because of course, not all partnerships are beneficial or useful for every type of initiative. So to me, integration data could help you identify a need in your community that another community organization could help address. So if you've identified sort of a service area that you're interested in pursuing, there might be another organization locally that could really help you move the needle. Perhaps the data indicates a need in the community and another organization works with a population different from the one that you serve. So you might be able to broaden your impact by partnering with this other organization to reach two groups of people. Perhaps the data shows progress in a community-wide goal and more partners are needed for the goal to progress. So you're looking for expansion-related data. Perhaps the data underscores a need in the community that the government could or should address. If you've got solid partnerships with the government, you could show some of the data you've collected to say, look, the data we're collecting shows this. This is really under your purview. Help us do this. Perhaps the data underscores a need that a parish or another religious organization should address. Again, defending your idea, putting some meat on the bones of the proposal. Perhaps a local collaborative needs data to defend a funding proposal. So again, numbers usually make some sort of proposal stronger. And finally, data can also show progress on an initiative that you're already working on. So if you need to prove to funders or your board or other community members that you are making headway, the data can show proof of that. So when we're talking about integration work, what are some of the specific benefits of partnerships in this type of work? I'm sure if, as most of you already know, whether you're in government or in nonprofit or somewhere else, partnerships often do expand the reach of a program. That's not unique to integration work. But I do think there are some unique reasons why partnerships are beneficial. So for one, partners might have unique skill sets that are not present at your organization. Maybe it's a language capability or a cultural awareness. Maybe they have connections to communities that you don't have. Maybe they've got lived experience, folks with lived experience informing their work that would really benefit your work and help you better serve the community. So partnerships might bring that to the table for some work. Partners might have access to key community members that you don't have. I think we all know that usually if a new initiative isn't gaining traction within a community group, it's often really helpful to have a trusted community leader endorse the project, help get it off the ground, and a partnership might give you some access to those leaders. Partnerships can help inform your decision-making process. They might be collecting their own data. They might have experience doing a certain type of project in the past that worked or didn't work, but they can really provide some good information when trying to develop a new program for the community. Partnerships can help your agency serve many more clients and in different ways. So of course, again, different areas of service, different clientele, different populations, different areas of the city or the town, but in many ways they can broaden your reach. It's possible that partnerships could improve the relationship between immigrants and the receiving community. If they've got inroads to different community groups, your voice is amplified. And you might be able to bridge the gap between different groups a little bit more easily because there's already relationships there. Partnerships might lead to a more engaged community on integration efforts. Sometimes the bigger the effort or the public campaign that brings in more community members, makes the word travel faster. And so you might be able to get more volunteers or more public support for an integration effort with some partnerships. And then it can be true that funders sometimes like partnerships on a community effort because the reach is bigger. The impact sometimes can be bigger, more impactful, reach more people, and sometimes that's appealing to funders. So these are all benefits of partnerships we've seen. And I'm sure there are many others. So I want to move now to specific partnerships within integration work that I have seen be helpful within our own network. I will stop here and address a few of your questions. I see a couple in the Q&A box. So let me take a look at those. If you've got any while I'm reading through these questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box so that I can see them easily. Let me see here. Okay, first question, how does an agency access the surveys that I mentioned? They're on our website. I have a link at the end of this presentation that will take you to those surveys. Another question, do you have the surveys in other languages? Unfortunately, no. At this time, they're just in English and in Spanish. Someone asked, what is the percent of immigrant representation that makes the 33% of respondents? So I believe you're referring to the agency staff data that I mentioned earlier. So it said something like 33% of respondents believe that there's immigrant representation on boards and committees of an agency. So in this case, I would not know how many immigrants were included in the folks that were surveyed. It's just agency staff. So it's just anybody who works at an agency. And then someone else asks, how can you conduct outreach to heighten community response to surveys? So of course, one of the difficult things about surveys is actually getting people to respond to them. So I think for to me, the agency staff survey is the easiest one to implement because we have it as an online survey. send it out to your agency staff. Maybe you have a staff brown bag or something else where you explain the purpose behind collecting that data. And it's pretty easy to get those staff members to answer the survey. Clients and community members, to me, are a little bit more difficult. In the past, clinic affiliates for the client survey have issued them at ESL classes, issued them at intake for immigration legal services, issued them at Know Your Rights presentations, at any touch point where the agency is interacting with newcomer clients. This does mean, of course, that you will likely, it's possible to have the same respondent multiple times answering the survey. And that's just one of the shortcomings of the survey. As far as community members, to me, that's the hardest group. We've heard folks leaving the surveys at the library and then coming back and picking them up. Again, at community events, we've got some groups who do, instead of doing Know Your Rights presentations for newcomer clients, they do Protect Your Neighbor presentations. So informing community members about the rights of immigrants, regardless of status, sort of immigration law 101, things like that. So you could put the surveys out at that moment. So just thinking about where you're interacting with and have a captive audience of community members. Some people put them out in their agency newsletter. Hey, we've got the survey. We'd love to get your response, maybe on social media. But again, it is, survey completion and data collection is always very tricky. But those are some answers that, or some strategies that our network has used. Okay, but this time I think that's all the questions. So we'll keep going. But please put them in that chat, in the Q&A box. It makes it much easier for me to see. Okay, so we're going to feature 4 types of community partnerships that I think can be really beneficial. This is not a comment on how easy or hard it is to get these partnerships off the ground, just how they might be helpful in your work. First community partnership I want to highlight is a partnership with the city government. Again, could be easier or harder to establish depending on the size of your city. Your agencies already established relationships with your city government and lots of other factors. But some of the reasons why city government could be a great partner in integration work. First, of course, city government touches all aspects of daily life and really is so varied in its resources and presence in the community. Examples can be the libraries, the public parks, the police department, city council, health and human services, public schools. The list goes on and on. So of course, city government has access to resources that you might not have. Space, volunteers, marketing, the power of public persuasion, big megaphone. So these are some resources that you might want to avail yourselves of and could with a partnership with the city government. They often have access to funding, which of course is always of interest for programming. They have the ability to make issues a priority. So if you can make the case that your integration related issue should be a priority for city government, they have the ability to sort of amp up efforts on their end. And for you, being their trusted source, one advantage of a partnership with the city government is that if you are already their trusted source for immigration-related data, you're their trusted source and their go-to for some reason, some subject area, really allows you the ability to frame the data and set the agenda in a way that you think would be most beneficial to the community. So it's the city government can be a really strong partner. Okay, so some of the resources some of the ways our affiliates have used a partnership with city government in the past are listed here. In some cases, city governments have had repeat funding to distribute. And our affiliates have gotten that repeat funding for just immigrant-related services, whether that's immigration legal services, ESL classes, food donations of some sort of support for the newcomer community. And some city governments have just repeatedly given that funding to certain groups that they have a trusted relationship with, who they've seen distribute the resources in a manner that they agree with, and things like that. We have several affiliates who have partnered with city government to offer naturalization workshops for the reasons we just discussed. The marketing that the government can provide is just much further and wider than an individual agency can often do. Usually these are bigger workshops so that the nonprofit can use the space offered by the city government, which is a bigger space than they might be able to offer. City government can get volunteers and usually has access to a lot more volunteers. The infrastructure needed for a NATS workshop, printers and computers and all those things, and copiers can often be provided by the city. So again, NATS workshops are a nice idea for partnerships with the city government. Other affiliates have offered legal services provided at the library. So the city government has said, yes, we know we need to offer more immigration legal services to low-cost immigration legal services. Such and such an agency, please help us do that. And so the agency will partner with the government, probably receive funding, and go to the local libraries, X times a month or whatever, to offer the services. We've seen several collaborations with local police. So, the agencies recognize that the newcomer community does not have a strong relationship with the police. The police themselves recognize this and are saying, we need help. We don't have a good relationship. People are not calling us for help. They don't feel safe, but they don't trust us. Agency, city, we need help with this. And so we've seen a few partnerships like that where the agency and the police force will come together and plan a way to increase the sense of trust in the community in a way that does not scare anyone and that is beneficial. But we've seen several examples of that. Some of our programs have done information sessions to city council or chambers of commerce, immigration law 101, or just integration 101, just some basic information so that members of city council or chambers of commerce have a better understanding of immigration law. And then, of course, we've seen some of these partnerships improve access to school personnel, services, and meetings for non-English speakers at the public school level. So some advocacy efforts related around that. Partnerships bringing from local agencies, bringing in classes for adults, English light language classes for adults at public school buildings, or some work to increase the numbers of interpreters, translated materials, has also resulted from these partnerships with city government. Second community partnership I want to highlight would be partnerships with local places of worship. Again, here are some of the reasons why these partnerships can be strong. First, of course, if you partner with a local place of worship, you might have access to regularly attending community members, which enables, a few things: constant audience and a repeat audience, so that you can build a relationship with people. You can be sort of reoccurring presence, reinforce your messages, and over time, establish yourself as a trusted source of information or a trusted service provider. The local place of worship is a trusted source, so that if you are able to partner with that local place of worship and you're trying to get the word out about something, it is likely that the community members that frequent that place of worship are likely to trust it more or pay attention to it a little bit more, because it's coming from the place of worship, a trusted source of information. Place of worship can be a safe space, so you might be able to partner with them and offer types of community events or training or education or something at this safe space, so people aren't scared to come to interact with. For example, if you're doing a community event in partnership with the police, for example, perhaps you might have more success offering that community engagement at the place of worship because people trust it and they feel less scared going somewhere where the police will be present. Something I think important to point out is that often for places of worship, welcoming is in the mission. It's in the religious doctrine of the faith. It's one of the primary missions and goals of the place of worship. So your mission of increasing the welcome that people feel in your community and the sense of inclusion that your community is offering to all its residents matches. And so just alone in that sort of mission match, you might find some nexus for a partnership that both entities would feel would be beneficial. Another important point to mention is that in a place of worship, it's often that newcomers and receiving community members are coexisting. So they're already coming to this same space to worship, to do community service, to do whatever it is that the place of worship is doing to congregate its members. And so if you are offering some sort of integration related program that needs both newcomers and receiving community members, whether it's for data collection or some sort of community-based project that you're trying to get off the ground, you've got both communities right here at the local place of worship that hopefully already trust each other and have a relationship with each other. And that might make your program more easily successful. And then again, the local place of worship might have access to resources that you don't. Space, marketing, audience, volunteers. So those are some of the reasons why a local place of worship might be worth your consideration. So here are some of the ways our partners have used place of worship. They have come to the place of worship weekly or monthly and offered a Know Your Rights training or session to the congregants, or a Protect Your Neighbor session that I just talked about a minute ago. So again, just a regularly occurring community outreach event. In some cases, our nonprofit agencies have partnered with the local place of worship to offer routine free legal services to different populations. They come every Sunday and do consultations for a couple of hours, so people know that they're coming. They've done voter registration drives at the place of worship. In at least one case I can think of, there's been a farming co-op program. So the nonprofit agency had the resources and interest to offer a community garden for newcomers where they could grow produce and then sell it at the farmer's market. And a local church had an empty lot. So they partnered, space, equipment, tools, and people, and got together and made this garden happen. So that was really successful. We've got a couple others who nonprofits offer ESL or citizenship classes at local places of worship. And then the congregants, the receiving member congregants, serve as mentors to the students in the class, help them study for the citizenship test, provide English language conversation help, and just sort of mentor and encourage folks who are applying for citizenship through the process. There's many ways, I'm sure you all have many ideas too, of how places of worship and nonprofits can work together on integration and inclusion efforts. Okay, third partnership I want to highlight would be a partnership with the public at large. So here are some of the reasons why that could be beneficial. Of course, with the public comes, a limitless array of different communities. So really, whoever you are seeking to access, needing the support of, sort of a market share you're trying to pursue, the public is the partner you're looking for. They, of course, have access to groups and funding and support that you are seeking. The public itself, word of mouth, social media, all these things can carry your mission far and wide. And of course, the public has diverse sets of volunteers. Of course, when dealing with the public, it's a little bit like the Wild West. You have to really think about why you want to partner with the general public, what you're seeking to get out of it, and sort of narrow down your focus of that partnership in order to make it worthwhile. So in this case, I'm going to highlight a specific program that we've seen in our network to show you what I mean about narrowing down the focus, really to make something really beneficial for the community as a whole. So in this case, there's a program in Seattle, Washington called the program is at the St. James Cathedral. And the project was called the Elder Integration Project. It is now defunct simply because they worked themselves out of a job, which is sort of the biggest sign of success one can have. But several years ago, one staff member in particular at St. James Cathedral noticed that elderly immigrants and refugees in the Seattle community were really isolated, lonely, depressed, not leaving their apartments and homes, not accessing community resources, and of course, generational divides and language divides and lots of factors there that were really causing this group of people to not feel like they belonged within their new community, not accessing any of the services. So this particular staff person decided to do something about it. So her goal, of course, was to help elderly immigrants integrate into the community while encouraging them to maintain or regain their independence. So she marketed to the greater public, including parish and just general community volunteers and the participants for volunteers. Does anyone have a skill or a class or time that you could just donate to our program and help these folks get out into their city? And as a result, people from different interests and backgrounds and things say, yes, I can teach a class on how to make sushi. I love public parks. I'm happy to give a tour. I really like public transportation. Let me take everybody on the bus today and show them how to take the bus. Up to people showing them the tour of the state capitol, how to access their representatives, how to volunteer at the state capitol, gardens, all these things. So eventually, this elderly immigrant group sort of formed itself as a support group and no longer needed the community volunteers to engage because they had learned so much that they could now take in newcomers and show them the ropes, which is what I mean by they worked themselves out of a job. But through their partnership with the public as a whole, who were able to volunteer their various skills and sort of capital and getting access to different types of things within the community, they were really able to expand the welcome to their new community members. So again, I do think with partnering with the public, the possibilities are endless. And it really is important in this particular case to very much narrow down the focus of the initiative so that you can effectively funnel the public in. So last partner that I will highlight here today is partnerships with other nonprofits. We'll spend a little bit more time on this because I do think that this particular type of partnership requires a little bit different type of management. So other nonprofits might be able to offer to you existing infrastructure that you don't have. Again, language capabilities, access to different communities, the perspective of lived experience that could better inform your work, lots of different infrastructure offerings that you might not have. They might have an existing volunteer base that would benefit the program that you don't have. They might have existing funding support that you don't have. They might have community collaborations already existing that you could just join. But also, as I mentioned before, community collaborations can be appealing to funders. So this might be the reason you decide to pursue a partnership, is to simply create some sort of community collaboration. It's also possible that with nonprofits, you can divide and conquer. We have a few collaborations that I'm thinking of within the clinic network where they've said, okay, well, we are 3 or 4 really big immigration legal service programs in our mid-sized town. Instead of competing for people and resources, we're going to form this collaboration, and we're going to do naturalization applications, and you're going to do this, and they're going to do this, and we're just going to, divide everybody so that we're working together as a team instead of competing. And so that might be an area for you to pursue. Again, because this type of partnership could take so many different forms, I just chose to focus on one tiny little example from our network to show you, one example. I'm sure you all can think of many also. This would be an example of an agency, Catholic Charities of Pueblo in Colorado, and then another very small program called Los Pobres, also in Pueblo. And the goal of the partnership was to expand the reach of immigration legal services, as well as gather information from the local community about what needs were, what services could be provided, and things like that. So the local nonprofit, which is Los Pobres, and then Catholic Charities of Pueblo partnered together to offer, and so Catholic Charities came to Los Pobres and offered free legal consultations every Thursday. Plus, they gave a Know Your Rights training at this nonprofit's location weekly. So the clients were able to plan and expect that Catholic Charities would be there offering the free consultations, would be there offering the Know Your Rights training. Catholic Charities was able to access this community in a way that they weren't before. So it really gave them access to a new and different community. And one of the reasons it worked, and one of the reasons why Catholic Charities sought after this partnership with Los Pobres, was because the leader of Los Pobres, Sister Nancy, is known as the person that all newcomers know when they arrive in Pueblo to go find. She knows where the resources are, she knows how to get you help, and so she's just the point person. And so Catholic Charities knew that they would make inroads more successfully with the immigrant community if they could just partner with Sister Nancy. And so of course it's now been very successful, and everyone's sort of in a routine, and both partners are very dependable and reliable, and they are able to broaden their reach in this community because of this partnership. A couple other examples, just for more ideas, small and large scale. We've seen, for example, in Chula Vista, a local government advisory committee that was formed and is now available at the local government level, that does not require any immigration status in order to participate. This happened because the service providers in the area were organized in asking the city for what it could do to help include and welcome newcomers. And so this was the city's response to that collective effort by the nonprofit, the stakeholders in the community. So I think that's a great result, because now folks that might not have been represented at local government places where opinions were being collected are now there. Another example would be joining together to sponsor, the city joined together to sponsor a series of resident-led projects that were proposed by residents and their neighbors. Again, the city is supporting this work that the residents themselves are saying, hey, this really needs to get done. And the residents are doing the work themselves, but of course they need some support by bigger entities like the city. And then finally, another example of nonprofit public partnerships would be an agency in New York is connecting newly arrived immigrants with established members of the community who might speak the same language and similar cultural values, to serve as sort of ambassadors or helpers or mentors to the newly arrived, to show them the ropes and to make them feel more comfortable and welcome. So there's just so many ideas of what partnerships can do and how you can really better serve the community. It's really limitless. I do want to mention, I have this at the end of the presentation, but we have about 80, I think at this point, 80 plus, what we call program highlights of, we've just highlighted all these different integration ideas within our network in about a page on our website, in the hopes that people will read them and find inspiration for their own local idea. So these, of course, are hyperlinked to that page, and you can read more about it, but it could be a great source of inspiration for you. Okay, I do want to talk about features of a strong partner and spend a little bit of time on this because it is important when considering partnerships because they can be really impactful to your program. So when you're thinking about a partner, you do want to consider a partner that has long-term partner potential, unless, of course, the program you're developing is very short-term. But, you know, establishing any relationship, partnership takes work and compromise and management. And so sometimes it's better to do that for a long-term partnership so that you don't have to do it over and over again. So hopefully there's a shared interest with your potential partner, you know, whether that's an interest of public safety or increased access to public space or libraries or what have you, but there's got to be some sort of shared interest in order for the partnership to focus on that. It's likely that a strong partner might have expertise in a different service delivery area, again, so that your reach is expanded. Again, a strong partner might have a different population, attracting different populations, already has a volunteer pool. So these are just access to people that you don't have. I do think it's important that a strong partner be reliable and organized. You don't want to be spending your time trying to, you know, track people down and people aren't answering your phone calls and you agreed upon this one thing and it's hard to get it actually accomplished, or, you know, your partner has agreed to, you know, provide 10 copiers and on the day of the event they only bring 2, and, you know, so you do want to look for a partner that is reliable and organized, and also one that's willing to coordinate the partnership. You know, we do have sample materials and something we call the Volunteer Management Toolkit. That's even an MOU that is between 2 nonprofit organizations saying, okay, agency A, you know, you promise to provide X, Y, and Z. Agency B, you promise to provide, you know, X, Y, and Z. So just laying out the expectations and signing it so that everyone's clear. I think a strong partner would also bring the perspective of a lived experience to the decision making. Are folks that you are serving in the communities that you're serving in leadership positions or are helping inform program decision making, so that it's really governed by the needs of the community and not just sort of, you know, people making guesses. To that end, what are some red flags for partnerships? A bad reputation, I think, is a red flag and might make you reconsider the partnership. A past negative experience with another organization, again, might be a red flag. If you're talking to funders and they seem somewhat wary of another nonprofit with whom you're interested in partnering, that might be a red flag. If they don't want to coordinate the partnership, they're not really interested in the MOU or really delineating responsibility and resource provision, to me, that would make me nervous. I need things systematically laid out. If they're really hard to get a hold of, I think that would be difficult. If they're engaged in the unauthorized practice of law, and you are trying to partner with some sort of legal related project, that would make me reconsider the partnership. If they overpromise what they can do or contribute, that would be a red flag for me. And if they're not really interested in asking the community what it wants and needs, they just sort of want to plow ahead and make decisions based on, you know, what they think is true, that would also make me think that I might want to find a different partner. Along those same lines, though, it's important that you ask yourself when you are seeking partnerships if you are a good partner, so that other people will look to partner with you. You know, really ask yourself and consider and be able to articulate, what do you bring to the table? What are your strengths? What resources do you have? What access do you have? What more can we accomplish with partnerships? Be able to articulate that so that you know what you're looking for and you know that the partner knows that they're going to benefit from your partnership. Are we an agency others would consider to be a strong partner? You know, if you're demonstrating any of these red flags to your community, you might want to address those first before you go and seek a partnership. What internal structures do we have in place to participate in a partnership? Are we ready to engage in a partnership? Can we follow through? Can we contribute something new and different to this resource? Do we have any success in this particular issue area to call on when we're engaging in some sort of partnership? And then again, can we follow through? Can we do what we are saying we are going to do? So just a note on how to manage a partnership. Again, mentioned we have a volunteer management toolkit with all sorts of templates and tools and lists and all the things that you could use to manage a partnership. I put the link at the end of this presentation, but here are the highlights. When you're establishing a partnership, you want a clear division of labor. Who is doing what? When is that happening? Who do we contact if there's a problem? Clear division, clear expectations. You want a clear understanding of responsibilities so that efforts aren't duplicated or that things aren't missed. So a clear division of labor and clear division of responsibilities, and so that everyone knows who's doing what. Signed statement of expectations, like I mentioned before, maybe an MOU. Regular meetings help keep things on track. Regular meetings help enforce this labor and responsibilities and expectations, because those are sort of the guideposts of the partnership, and they're reinforced when you're meeting regularly. You do want to clearly engage in volunteer management. And again, that's the toolkit that we have of how you're what's the word I'm looking for? Recruiting volunteers, retaining them, managing them, matching them up with different positions within the program that you're trying to get off the ground. Who's, if you're in a partnership, who does this volunteer belong to? But you want to make sure that that's really clearly outlined. You might want to think about, sort of dates of deliverables or expectations and sort of coordinate this, by X date, agency 1 will be doing this and agency 2 will be doing this by this date, same thing, so that the project is clearly mapped out with who's doing what. And then you might want to consider staff training and quality control as well. So if this is a big partnership with all agency involvement, staff need to be trained about that partnership. What are the expectations, the goals, the jobs, the tasks, who's assigned to what? And then how are you ensuring quality so that, again, you're fulfilling the promises you made to that partnership, and so that they'll want to engage with you further. So I do want to mention that we do have something we call the Integration Resource Guide, and it's really a guide to help you collect and use the data that we were talking about earlier. It talks about the integration basics again. It talks about the data that you can collect, how to collect it and store it, how to use it. We've got some templates in there, how to make graphics with the data. And so the link is right there. So you can access the surveys from that link, as well as this resource guide to help you when you're actually collecting it. So I'll stop here to take more questions, and then we will finish up. So please, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box. Okay, first question I see, can you give some specific examples of partnering with police? Sure. In one specific example I'm thinking of, the police told the Catholic Charities that they really had no relationship with the refugee population, that they felt the refugee population was very scared of the police. They understood why, but they needed help in bridging the gap because they felt that the police felt that public safety was at risk because of this this weak relationship with the refugee community. So the police and the nonprofit partnered together to figure out a way to address this issue. So some of the things they decided to do was, with the refugee population that was already here, they would have a community event at the nonprofit office, so a safe space, trusted space. The police would come. Of course, the refugee community was informed. The police came in plain clothes. They didn't look as scary. There was cookies and cake and snack and things like that. And the police could give a presentation about their job. They had interpreters so that it was in the refugees' native language. And the police were able to say, this is why we're here, this is what we're doing, this is how we can help you, and begin to sort of break down the walls of the fear. Of course, that took some time. They also would have plainclothes police with bearing first meal for the refugees come with Catholic Charities to greet folks at the airport in a very non-threatening, welcoming way to establish a relationship right from the get-go. So it was very locally organized, right? The nonprofit knew what the refugee community could handle and would appeal to them and would resonate with them, and they were able to design it that way. Another example I would think of, if you look in our program highlights that I mentioned, a couple communities have heard from the police that the newcomer community, even if they weren't eligible for driver's licenses or other types of government issued identification, they still needed a form of identification for things like if they were stopped by the police, if they wanted to check out a library book, if they wanted to withdraw their child from school, or what have you. So as a result of the partnership with police and the nonprofit and the city government, after a long while, they came up with a community-issued ID that anyone can access. And it's considered a valid form of ID when one of these instances occurs, when the police have asked you for your identification or you want to establish a library card or what have you. So those are a couple ideas. Let's see. Someone else is asking about examples of successful partnerships with the business community. Again, I think, I'm sure you folks in the chat could also contribute some of these. But as far as, donations or other types of financial or space or food type support that's needed for community events, such as, a fair or a celebration of some sort, or perhaps these resident-led projects would need, food for the day or something, or some financial support. I think the business community would really be a nice partner in that regard. Let me see this next question. Okay, so someone's asking, what would it look like if the community provided feedback that they're not interested in police presence at community events, but the organization relies on a city government partnership that involves law enforcement? How to address this conflict? That sounds really complicated and very locally oriented. I think, this probably begins with some sort of community outreach for folks to understand that it is likely that at a large-scale community event, police have to be present. That's usually, crowd control or a liability concern or things like public safety. So it might be that the organization needs to sort of take a couple steps back and begin to bring the police and the community together to sort of break down these walls of distrust or fear, and then restart the emphasis on community events. That probably would be the first place my brain would go. But trying to get at, establishing the relationship again before forcing the community event, because probably can't get around if you're going to have a big, festival downtown or something. You can't get around the police presence, I'm assuming. That would be my first answer. As we finish up here, please send in more questions if you have them. But I'll keep going and keep my eye on that. Here's our webpage. It has lots of the things I just mentioned. A lot of the basics that about 60% of you indicated you were interested in. The podcast series that we have listed there is really a 3-part series on integration basics. In my mind, it's a great series to use if you're doing a brown bag at your agency on integration, because it walks you through exactly what we did today. This is our definition. This is what it looks like. This is how it happens. This is why we should get involved. They're very short, like 7 minutes. That's a nice resource. We have a bunch of toolkits on there about the basics of integration, how to get it started in your community. We have those program profiles that I mentioned. We've got 80 or so just highlights of actual programming that's going on in the network, from small to big to simple to complex to very inexpensive to expensive, give you inspiration and ideas, because really, as I mentioned, it's local. Local is where it's at. We have those surveys that I mentioned. We have the volunteer management toolkit, and then we have some discrete resources such as a month-by-month planning guide for integration work. So just, you could do this in January and this in February and this in March. And then for those of you who are affiliated with a religious entity, we do have religious holiday integration ideas. So how to encourage integration during your Easter celebration or your Christmas celebration, or different things like that, if you're looking for sort of more parish-based integration ideas. Okay, so we are almost finished. So if you've got any last-minute questions, please submit those. I do want to make a plug for our newsletter. It goes out 3 times a year. It actually just went out last week, but it's called Inclusive Communities, Immigrant Integration and Public Education Resources. You can sign up there. And it's really nice. It's just, concrete things you can do to promote integration. It's the tools that we've created in the past 3 months or so. And we don't fill up your inbox too often, just 3 times a year. I want to conclude with my favorite quote. Well, one of our favorite quotes anyway on our team. And we tend to always use this one to conclude our information. But the reason we like this quote so much is it really reminds us of the big picture that we talked about at the beginning of this webinar, that we tend to be so focused on our daily service delivery goals and outcomes and outputs. And really, we are so benefited by broadening the perspective a little bit and thinking about the place our day-to-day work holds in this big picture of promoting real integration. So the quote is, where migrants and refugees are concerned, the church and her various agencies ought to avoid offering charitable services alone. They are also called to promote real integration in a society where all are active members and responsible for one another's welfare. So you all are doing such important work in your day-to-day efforts and positions, and it's impactful and it's important, and you really can promote real change within your community by focusing on integration. So I thank you so much for your time and your effort and your attention, and I will stay here just a couple more minutes and answer any more questions that I see come into the question box. The newsletter that's 3 times a year is our integration newsletter, and it's called the Inclusive Communities Immigrant Integration and Public Education Resources. So that's our 3 times a year newsletter, and you can sign up at that link that you see right there if you're interested in receiving it. Okay, thank you so much, and I hope you join us for our next integration webinar that will occur later this year. Thanks again.